And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Happy Friday. I'm really excited to be here with Eric Piscini, CEO of Hashgraph, an old friend, a former colleague, and somebody who's doing probably more for the profitability of Web3 ecosystems than most right now. Eric, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be with you again. Long journey, right? You and I.
We've seen some stuff. I mean, we could do your background, but obviously we've both shared the stage at Deloitte. We've both interwoven across different Web3 projects and shared stories, glasses of pastis, and concerns and frustrations on the streets of Paris over many a time. Although obviously you're based in the US now. For those people who don't know you, Eric, obviously we know each other rather well, but for those people who don't know your wonderful story, could you give us your brief introduction and how you found your way to Hashgraph?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this. You can hear I was born in Paris, which is why you mentioned pastis earlier. But I moved to the US about 25 years ago. I was with a company who moved me to the US. And then a few years later, I joined Deloitte and did a lot of work in financial services, fintech, innovation, cloud, payments. And in 2013, decided to start a blockchain practice for Deloitte, very early days. I was based in the US and we had a lot of fun, and you were part of that journey of building a new practice for Deloitte worldwide. And now we have many practitioners from Deloitte actually still in Web3, leading a lot of different projects, including you. After that, I did a quick stop, and then I went to IBM for another 3 years. Did continue to do blockchain solutions for healthcare in particular. And we did a cool project in New York. We can talk about this maybe. And then about 3 years ago, a little bit more than 3 years now, I joined the Hedera ecosystem and became the CEO of Hashgraph, which is the team behind Hedera.
That's a long history. 2013 as a time to start a practice when pretty much just the Ethereum white paper or yellow paper had made it out. That's some foresight, or rather some commitment. To have stuck at it and still be here after that amount of time is massively impressive, and I enjoy every time we get together to talk. And I'd love today's conversation to be a little bit of an insight into what we talk about when we get together and the nuts and bolts of what's going to make Web3 successful or not, because I think there's plenty of people who are happy to talk about what blockchain can do, the nuances of technology. But somebody who's worked in a Big Four, somebody who's worked in IBM will always have a little bit of the background of commerciality. Of, well, if a client's not going to pay money for this, then I can't pitch it. Or if there's no business case for doing this, what are we doing? There's rarely room for hype in Deloitte, occasionally in IBM, but usually very closely followed by a $10 million plus sum. And so this is the attitude we take into the work that we do, and clearly you do. For those people who don't know you, Eric, in terms of the Hedera and the Hashgraph ecosystem, give us the intro. It's not as complicated as Ripple, but there are some component parts. So please give us the Hedera Hashgraph 101.
Yes, thank you. And I realize it's still complicated, but I'm going to try to oversimplify, because I think it doesn't need to be complicated from a market point of view. We started in 2018 as one single team. And everything was done from the US, right? That was a US project from the beginning. And at some point, the regulatory pressure in the US forced everybody, not just us, everybody to decentralize the business model. So we did, and we created a lot of different entities over the years. Today, fast forward, we have been optimizing that structure. And now when you look at the Hedera ecosystem, you have Hedera, which is the council, and we can talk about this a little bit. You were actually on the council at some point representing IBM. Hedera Council is the group of entities running the network. It's a small team just managing the network. And then you have Hashgraph, which is a team behind everything that Hedera needs. Think of product engineering, marketing, communication, cybersecurity, business development. We do everything that Hedera needs, right? And the founders, Mance, Harman, and Dr. Lehman Baird, are at Hashgraph today, right? So just to give you a sense of the gravitas and the importance of Hashgraph, this is where pretty much everybody is today. And then you have entities in the ecosystem who are having similar names as us, and so that creates a little bit of confusion. But we work with them obviously really well. But the two main entities are Hedera and Hashgraph. And of course, like every other Web3 project, we have a cryptocurrency called HBAR, and that may be where some of the confusion is coming from, but not that different from any other Web3 project. So hopefully that helps a little bit clarify. But you know, when we operate in the market, we think of ourselves at Hedera, we think of ourselves at Hashgraph together. We don't really think of the difference when we operate, right? We have to think of the difference from a legal point of view, but not from an operational point of view.
Got it. Makes a ton of sense. And for those people who have yet to delve into the Hedera ecosystem, there are a few nuances to the way that Hedera was conceived, how Lehman and Mantz designed the concept around Hedera, what it was stood to be, how the technology worked, how the governance works, that I think are novel. I think that will set Hedera apart. In your words, how do you talk about the differentiation from any other blockchain out there, from Ethereum, from Avalanche, from VeChain, from anything? What's unique to Hedera that you think sets you apart?
Yeah, I think you have three angles to answer that question. The first differentiation is, I would say, a technical differentiation. And not many people care about this anymore, but it's still very important. Hedera was built on a technology that is technically not a blockchain, but don't tell anyone. Because we still say blockchain, but it's not technically a chain of blocks. And so that gives us the ability to do much faster confirmation of transactions. Latency is very low. The cost of transaction is very low. So that's typically one of the differentiation. And we are ABFT, if you want to go deep in the technology, we are ABFT, which is really, really good from a security point of view. So that's the technical angle. Then you have the business decision that Mantz and Lehman made at the very beginning. And I think the biggest one is the fact that the transaction fees are not only very low, but denominated in US dollar. So when you build a solution on Hedera, you know that transactions are going to be paid still in HBAR, which is the cryptocurrency, but the value of that transaction fee is going to be in USD. And because of this, you can predict the cost of the platform you're going to build in the future. You don't rely on whatever happened on other blockchains where the cost of the transaction fee fluctuates, which gives you, either you take the risk of that or you actually don't build the platform because you don't know the cost of running the platform in the future. That's the second differentiation. And the third one is what you talked about earlier, and this is a governing council. This is the structure to run the network, right? So Hedera is a public permissioned blockchain. So we have 34, 35, I think now, organizations running nodes, and there are well-known organizations, the IBM of the world, the Dell, the Google, the McLaren, one of the recent ones, FedEx, and others. They run the network, and they decide on the design, they decide on the pricing of the network, they decide on a lot of things, and they also obviously build on the network as well. And that is a really big differentiation from a governance point of view, right? So technical, business, governance, clearly differentiated across the board.
Love that. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to adoption, whether you call it a blockchain or not, whether there are 34 nodes or 100 nodes or 1,000 nodes. Broadly speaking, a lot of blockchains have similarities. There's block space that you can get from a bunch of different spaces. At this stage in the game, it's about what do we do with it? How do we encourage people into our ecosystem? How do we demonstrate what this technology is good at? And having a governance council of some of the Fortune 500 or some of the Fortune 100, some of the best known technology companies in the world on your side, challenging you, I think that's hugely powerful. We talked in the green room a little bit before this around blockchain organizations sometimes making it too complicated. And I believe you had a conversation recently with a Shark Tank veteran about Hedera. How did that one go? How did you explain Hedera to an American entrepreneur?
Well, so the fortunate thing is that when we talked to Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, he knew about us already, and he's been talking about HBAR in the past. But his point was, that we are not leveraging our position enough, and we are a little bit confusing from a brand point of view. So we know that. We know that we have some challenges from a branding point of view. Hedera, Hashgraph, HBAR, we know. But I think he has very interesting points on how do we accelerate the adoption, because we expose the value of what we are, with the cancer in particular, to a market that is much bigger than what we have today. So, interesting point, interesting data point from an entrepreneur who's been very successful and focused on mostly on the retail space, right? So we have to absorb that information and improve.
For sure. I mean, how did that conversation come about? I mean, how do you go about, you say, you know what, we've got to think more out of the box in terms of our growth strategy. Let's call up Kevin. Let's call up Mr. Wonderful. Let's put ourselves in the Shark Tank.
No, it didn't work like that. So the funny thing is, and people know already, but we have signed a partnership with McLaren, and McLaren is now a council member. So they run one of the nodes of Hedera. And during one of the Formula One event in Miami, Kevin was there and we were there because we are sponsoring the team. And that's how we started talking, because we were in the same place at the same time. And that's how we started getting some interesting insights from not just Kevin, but other people at the Formula One event, clients and future council members, hopefully engaging with us and telling us, how do they perceive us? How do we, improve the way we go to market, the way we build our platform, and we can talk about this. There is a lot of interesting data points, and that's one of the key value that we extract from having a partnership with our council members, is the ability to network with individuals who are sometimes not familiar with Web3 at all, but they give us really, really interesting insight, because you and I have been in this world for 10 years. You just forget that the rest of the world doesn't know enough about Web3. You just assume everything, right? So,
or doesn't care.
It's a very humbling experience when you do that. Yes. Yeah.
For sure. And again, I would never kind of give up the potential of, or the benefit of having experienced business leaders who have delivered growth, who've delivered technology solutions and integrations in a bunch of different settings, turn around and look at you guys and say, I feel like you're doing this in a too complicated way, or I don't understand what the value is, or your ecosystem needs this, that, or the other.
Yeah. The one sentence I use very often now for the last 2 years is, no one is buying blockchain, right? So it's an interesting, if you have an MBA and you've done business for a long time, you look at the Web3 industry and you realize that for the first time ever, there is an industry that started with the creation of its own money and spend that money in order to build value, right? Typically, it's the other way around. Typically, it's people using their time and energy and sometimes their own money to create value and then create additional value, additional money in that context, and then spend that money to continue to grow. Web3 has been very different from a starting point of view, right? Very, very different. And so it did create this mindset of, sometimes people think that money is free because we can create new money at the beginning and then just spend it, right? And when you apply the traditional way of thinking in business, saying the only way to make money is to sell something and for a client to pay for it, that is a change of culture that you have to slowly engage with in an organization, not just Hashgraph, right? There are any Web3 organization is facing the same challenge.
For sure. And the last 2 to 3 years have been the wake-up call to protocols to say, look, guys, AI is here, and it's taking all of the hype cycle and the discretionary spend or discretionary investment because it's new, it's sexy, it's shiny, whereas you guys are still talking about faster and better infrastructure. I do believe that the kind of decentralized Kickstarter model that Web3 created is massively of value. I also fully agree that in many cases, you've created hype cycles that fail to deliver, or you've created giant treasuries inside organizations who have no pressure to deliver because now they just basically have a family office with a large amount of somebody else's money and no accountability, which isn't a great way to run a profitable business, which gives me the perfect segue into kind of what I want to anchor today's discussion around, which is how do we make protocols profitable in 2026? I think 10 years into Web3 as a journey, it's no longer okay to say we're constantly improving the infrastructure. The block speed is faster, the decentralization is greater, the quantum resistance is higher. We have more governance, we've issued more tokens, blah, 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 blah. Like, we don't need any more of that. We don't need any more block space at this stage. What we do need is more business. How are you looking at that in general, and then specifically with Hedera and Hashgraph?
So we look at it in probably the same dimensions I mentioned earlier about the differentiation. One is the technology. So we continue to improve the technology, but not for the sake of technology, just because we know that we still have some challenges as an industry to generate the adoption we are looking for. One of those challenges is interoperability. And we announced last week in May at Consensus, just before Consensus actually, at HederaCon, which is a big Hedera conference we do every year. We announced a protocol called Clipper, CLPR, and it stands for Cross-Ledger Protocol. And Cross-Ledger Protocol is, think of it as a way to connect two different blockchains without the need of a bridge, all right? And that's really interesting from a technology point of view, and that actually addresses a key need from the industry to be able to say, I can pick a blockchain, but I will still have access to the other blockchains if I do that, because I have this Clipper solution that gives me access to the liquidity on other blockchains. That's a really, really, really important point from a business point of view, right? So that's part of the technology improvement that we continue to work on to make sure that step two, point number two, the business is actually getting better. So we've been building solutions on the top of the layer one. We've been building solutions for quite some time now. We call that the studios, right? We have AI Studio, Stablecoin Studio, Asset Tokenization Studio, and Sustainability Studio. And those are the key focus for us, right? We used to have an NFT studio. We used to have an AI studio. We decided to not spend too much time on those, but spend time on the first four. And that's been driving adoption of Hedera for sure, right? And then the next level of that is to actually build real solutions and sell those solutions, to our point earlier, generate revenue from selling those solutions. So we did an acquisition or a significant investment, I should say, into a company called IO Builders, based in Spain. And many of you probably know them because they are a really good team in Europe. And they've built a platform on the top of one of the studios I just mentioned called Assetto. And Assetto is an asset tokenization platform for financial services. So think, financial market infrastructure, what we call FMIs, banks, asset managers. They are all customer of Assetto. And now Assetto is on the top of Hedera, providing real business value for our client, right? So that's the second angle that I think is really important of focusing and making protocols profitable. And then the third one is a network or a consortium, an ecosystem play. And to say, in order to be profitable, we have to do this at scale, right? We cannot be the only one being profitable. We have to make our friends and partners profitable as well. And so we have engaged into a lot of different partnership activities, and we have a team dedicated to this to build networks, consortia, on the top of Hedera to generate real value. So again, real value around artificial intelligence, tokenization, stablecoin, and so on, but with partners in order to create real value, for example, stablecoins, and generate return from that. That's kind of the big pillar of the strategy for us at Hashgraph, at Hedera, to become a profitable. And profitable is interesting, right? In business, you want to be profitable, but the real value of being profitable is that you actually don't need to sell HBAR anymore, right? So you reduce the pressure on the sell side of having to sell HBAR to continue to fuel innovation and to fuel the future of Hedera. That's really what excites me, is to say, we don't have to sell HBAR to continue to grow and become a 100-year project, which means we can actually do it because we are not going to run out of HBAR, right? Because HBAR has a fixed amount. We are not going to do that because now we have enough money coming from other sources to continue the journey.
Which is probably an error that many other teams and protocols have made, which is at a certain point, you're struggling for revenue, the market's down, you're in a bear situation, the value of your treasury and your ability to invest is continuing to go down, and you've built nothing on the other side that can sustain it. So it's an interesting overlay. It sounds sort of like a venture studio model to some extent, which says, we're going to place a small number of bets on use cases or domains, like you said, sustainability. AI was one of those for a period of time, stable coins, digital assets. We're going to make some strategic investments in things that already exist for the things that we don't have to build ourselves. And collectively, that's going to then return value or return a revenue model to our ecosystem, because that's what a venture studio does. Right? You don't build everything yourself, but you may need to do some things because it's unique or it's not profitable, or it unlocks some of the things that your invested companies need to be able to progress. And like you said, the end goal is that it generates revenue, not a constant burn on the token, which
on the treasury. And it's also like acceleration, right? I mean, we are competing with formidable projects, right? And we need to make sure that we continue to be relevant to the financial institutions, to the supply chain companies, to the treasury management platforms. We need to continue to be relevant, and to be relevant, you need to be able to say, I am profitable, I am generating revenue. I'm not going to disappear tomorrow when the value of HBAR goes down or when the treasury runs out, right? So you make the decision-making process much easier for our clients, because now they see you as a real company making real money. They can engage with you for the long term.
And also that you have domain expertise when you come to that conversation, right? 2015, 2016, you could sort of probably walk in the door and say, hey, we've got tokens and blockchains and NFTs. We're going to decentralize everything. Do you want to work with us? And sort of people would be all kind of starry-eyed and be like, oh my God, yeah, let's do this. That'll be fantastic. You don't know anything about what we do. We don't know anything about what you do, but let's work together. Right? Fast forward 7 or 8 years, and nowadays it's like, you go to somebody and say, hey, I've got a blockchain. Would you like to decentralize things? It's a really good ledger. It's very trusted, very secure. And guys are like, why? What's in it for me? Or those people who've either tried something and failed and given up, because that's the way corporate innovation cycles work. Sadly,
I mean that's
the first failure.
I think in innovation you talk about tourism, right? So people go where we're doing blockchain tourism. So when you go on a trip as a tourist, at some point you come back home 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, and life is back to normal, right? But if you start moving from one country to another, then you commit for a long term, right? And that's what we want to be in the business of. We don't want to be in the business of tourism. We want to be in the business of moving long term to a trajectory that is creating value for all of us. And you and I have been in this business for a long time. The value of creating decentralized technologies when it comes to tokenization in particular is amazing, right? What we can unlock is amazing. And so we have to convince the organization and remove friction for them to be able to say, yes, I agree, let's engage. This is a strategic move that we have to make together.
Yes. But that doesn't come from saying, would you like to decentralize everything? That comes from saying, for example, most of the financial services industry, if not all of it, at this point is sold on the idea of 24/7 trading. How do we do that? With smart contracts and distributed ledgers, because that's the technology you need, so you don't have intermediaries or clearinghouses or custodians in a way that you would need to for Monday to Friday financial services. 2 extra days to make money. That sounds like a good thing. Who wouldn't want that? Right? And so now we see the general trend and the direction towards financial services embracing blockchain, digital assets, and stable coins to some extent, to a large extent, because The reason why is we can do this 24/7, cross-border, very low cost, very clear transparency, protocol-based, and eventually agent or agentic friendly. You then apply that to other industries. You say to an FMCG or to a manufacturing company or to a regulated entity, the story is different. You don't care about 24/7, but you might care about verification. You might care about digital identity. You may care about agentic commerce, but you need to have a solution for that. You need to be able to credibly say, here's what you do now. Here's how we can do it.
Yeah.
This version's better. Can we build it out together? And and I think there's been not enough of that in recent times.
Yeah.
But maybe outside the Hedera ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the realization that when you engage with large corporations, regulated and non-regulated entities, they make decisions for a long time. So you have to remove the friction for them to make that decision, but you also have to give them optionality, right? So, for example, it's something we launched last year is I'm going to call that a private version of Hedera, because we had some very significant clients asking for a non-public version of Hedera, right? Hedera is permission public, and they were telling us permission is great because we know who's validating the transactions, but public has some challenges. And we said, okay, we're going to create something that is private for your own benefit, knowing that you're going to at some point probably bridge with a public ledger or actually move to a public ledger in the future. But we're going to give you optionality, right? The point here is we're going to give you options to engage with that amazing technology. So then you can remove that from the decision-making process, public, private. You can pick both at the same time if you want and move on to the business creation.
I like that. And that brings back some trauma at the same time of kind of the early Hyperledger Fabric days, which really was blockchain training wheels, which is we like the idea of decentralized or distributed, but the idea of blockchains and smart contracts and automation feels a bit too much for us. So we'll start with something simple that we can control ourselves and has an on-off button, and there's not so much risk. But we'll accept that we don't get all of the upside of an open innovation ecosystem or the ability for others to build on top of what we've created, which I think is fine. But the business case for purely private networks is always more limited, as we saw when most of the IBM, if not all of the IBM consortium, failed because the business case didn't stack up. Trade layers we trade were valuable enough in small doses, but couldn't scale meaningfully because, as you've described.
Yeah, and I think the technology in today, at least, right? The technology is clearly the easy part, especially with what we've done, right? We have enough technology, enough optionality, enough features in our ecosystem, in our platform, so that you can build anything you want, really, right? So now the question is, what is the business case to build the next solution, right? And that's asset tokenization and so on. And that's really
the business case, and the actual transformation becomes the barrier, right? And again, as you and I have known, because we started our careers as people who worked in digital transformation. I know it's a bit of an unsexy term to say, but it's, plain English version of that is technology-led change with expectation of financial return, which is always hard. You work on any banking transformation, any payments transformation, it's multiple years, probably hundreds of millions of dollars, and really hard and really slow because there's lots of moving parts.
Yeah.
The same is true if you're moving from a Monday to Friday system to 24/7 system. The business processes, the risk controls, the just finance itself, just finance, there being a wallet, right? Alone is hard.
Yeah, I know. The piece we haven't touched on is also the regulatory unlock, right? So one of the friction points over the last few years was a risk from a regulatory point of view that you were making as an enterprise using digital assets and not having a clarity on what those assets are going to be, right? Or how are they going to be treated by the regulators? And we got some clarity, not all of it yet in the US. Hopefully something is going to happen. We cross our fingers, all of us. But even if it doesn't, I think we got tremendous progress already, right? And a few months ago now, many of the cryptocurrencies in the US were recognized as digital commodities, and we were one of them, which is a big unlock, right? Because now you can actually engage and know that you are engaging with a commodity when you touch HBAR. And by the way, when you touch other tokens as well. And so that clarity is going to improve. And then it also gives a chance for organizations to say, I don't have a regulatory risk anymore. I don't have a technology risk anymore. I don't have, whatever. All the risk that they have to manage are being addressed. So now the risk is, I don't have a business case anymore, right? And that's really where we need to spend time on. Yes,
for sure. And change is never easy, but I mean, thanks for taking a beat on that one. Because again, having the chance to put it out there and help people who just look at token price understand the complexity of changing entire industries, I think helps give us more time, gives us patience, and the speed of change in every industry right now is absolutely kind of breakneck. Mm-hmm. But if we're genuinely trying to change industries, those are not things that get decided overnight. Maybe they get decided, but they certainly don't get implemented in 10 minutes. So the difference between announcement and implementation, always a bit of a challenge.
Right. You and I were at IBM for a few years, and I think I'm pretty sure I'm right. Today, you have many organizations still running an IBM mainframe for their operation. That gives you an idea of change management in large organization. It's hard. It takes time. It takes leadership, and it takes resources to make that change.
For sure. We've gone into the boring digital transformation sphere. Let's get into something slightly more sexy. You teased that you're working with McLaren at the beginning of the show, and I want to double click on that one because Web3 and crypto, and specifically crypto exchanges, have had a very obvious love affair with Formula One for the longest time. I mean, some people love to go to races, love to hear loud noises, and love to enjoy the razzle dazzle of being amongst the high rollers in the world at a premier sporting event. But you guys, as I said, are slightly more focused on the commercial nature of your business, on meaningful growth and progress. I'm assuming this isn't just because Mance and Lehman like to go and watch the racing. Talk to us about the collaboration with McLaren and what's in it for you, and how is that specific investment for you going to return?
Yeah, I think so. You have three different ways to look at it, right? From a pure marketing point of view, McLaren is an amazing team, amazing company. Zach Brown is an amazing CEO, and there was a really good fit between the culture of McLaren and the culture of Hedera overall, right? And that's the beginning of a journey. Is always cultural fit. And then we looked at potential value creation, like we said earlier, business value creation. And of course, you have the traditional one. When you think about a retail brand, when you think of Formula One race, you think about fan engagement, right? So we've done that with them. They are running their fan engagement platform at Hedera. You can engage with it. You can get NFTs, right? So we are back to the NFT kind of concept. We don't call that really an NFT, but that's the idea. And that's really interesting from a fan engagement point of view for them, because they create a different kind of engagement with a different kind of population that is expanding, right? The target audience of Formula One is expanding, in part thanks to the Netflix TV series, right? But that's a really important part of the relationship. But you also have to look at McLaren as a company. It's a big company, and it's a global company, and they need global payments, and they need global settlement of their transactions. And they have a huge ecosystem of suppliers and partners that they need to connect with. And we are working with them on, enabling them to use technology like Hashgraph and Hedera to be able to improve their own operation. So there is something that's visible, the fan engagement platform, and something that's not going to be visible because it doesn't need to, which is the actual operation of McLaren. And we are working with them on those things. That is exciting to me because, typically I've done that for financial institutions, banks, and so on, supply chain companies, telco companies. McLaren is a bit unique as an organization. McLaren as a brand and a set of operations that are very unique and very interesting. And I became a Formula One fan I was one when I was a kid, and then I became one again because of this relationship. And when you understand the complexity of the operation, the science behind the cars, which is amazing, right? And the size of the team that needs to be put together in order to run a car like this, it's just amazing. It's just I'm an engineer and by background, and to me that's kind of a reconnection with my roots of being an engineer and looking at those cars, being engineering machines and wonders.
Yeah, just build a blockchain, then we'll talk, right? If you think Formula One's fine, but building a distributed ledger, much more complicated. I like that, and let me kind of do that in reverse order, I think, because brand benefits from any partnership always a little bit of an intangible, right? I think at this stage in our industry, adoption is the best form of marketing. I think in this era of AI-led evaluation of anything, hype is increasingly going to be less interesting to people, is going to be easier to see through. And there are enough exchanges who I understand, if you're an exchange, you need people to buy crypto in your exchange. So if people are, crypto, I need to go to insert name of exchange here, there's a very clear call to action there. If you're saying, I need some HBAR, I need a Hedera, right? Broadly speaking, people don't. And we've had the same experience or the same challenge with the partnership that VeChain have had with the UFC. We're on the canvas every time there's a UFC event. We have certain perks and privileges of working with the UFC. But we really want to integrate the technology with the UFC as an organization to be able to demonstrate why using blockchain, stablecoins, and tokens helps to change the way things work. So when you start talking about fan engagement, I think that's super important, because there are some characteristics there that make sense. The 99% of the people who love Formula One will never go to a race because it's expensive, because they're in 20 different countries around the world. Maybe one of them's in the country you live in, maybe it isn't. And even if it is, the tickets are super expensive and it's 3 days and so on and so forth. So a bit like cricket also, right? It's kind of hard to go to cricket games and you spend who could take 5 days to watch cricket? Sorry, this is turning into a rant. But
no, but I think there is so I'm a big fan of this podcast called Acquired, and they have a podcast, an episode on Formula One that everybody should listen to. But they're actually making a point that is super interesting, which is most of the Formula One fans do not watch live races. And that's interesting because most of the fans on other sports are actually watching live matches, like games, right? That's not the case in Formula One. And so that's a very unique situation. And that's where fan engagement is actually even more important, because your fan base is much bigger than the people watching or, to your point, going to the race.
Yes. Full disclosure, my cousin is a marketing director at one of the Formula One organizations, and we have this back and forth regularly about what's real fan engagement, right? Issuing digital collectibles as an exercise doesn't necessarily generate you more engagement. It's just a way of somebody trying out a technology. But like you said, there's a race every 2 weekends. You've got 13 days in between the race, or maybe 10 or 11 days. How are you interacting with your fan base in that moment? How are you building loyalty and interest in the partners that are on the car? How are you generating loyalty? How are you generating revenue? How are you monetizing that attention the rest of the time? It's not just by having people watch your YouTube channel, right? Formula One teams don't make that much money off of their YouTube revenue. They're not content creators, but there's plenty of other opportunities. And so I'm excited to see what you guys come up with in that domain. And then obviously McLaren's a massive supply chain organization, global organization, thousands of partners, etc. The more you can rope in those partners, maybe it becomes about stable coins, maybe it becomes about provenance. There's lots of levers you can play with there. So excited to hear what you guys come up with.
Yeah. Stay tuned. We're gonna push, pun intended, on this partnership for sure.
Exactly. And you mentioned the investment in IO builders. So does Hashgraph have an investment thesis at this point? Right. Obviously, some of this is confidential. Don't want to know the amounts that you have as your investment budget or anything like that. But as you look out in terms of ways of expanding your revenue model or ways of expanding value creation for Hedera and Hashgraph, How do you think about investments? What's the thesis that you're taking out right now?
Yeah, I think there is two different ways to think of this investment dimension. One is the transformation of the business of grants, right? So many Web3 projects I've done, and we did, gave a significant amount of treasury through grants for our ecosystem partners to build on the top of ourselves. That activity did not, and I'm not talking Hashgraph and Hedera in particular, I'm talking industry-wide, did not generate the return we were expecting, right? And so I think it's because of two things. One is because of the free money culture that we talked about earlier. And two is because the alignment of incentive was not strong enough, right? And when you give free money to someone, even if you have milestones and commitments and so on, it is still not a strong alignment of incentive. And so we are turning that into investments, right? So we stopped doing grants for the large majority. And we are now looking at investments into companies, treasuries, and partnerships, but with a very strong alignment of incentive between us and them, right? So call that traditional business if you want, or corporate VC if you want, right? That's one. And then the second one is strategic investment into solutions that we believe are critical to our success and critical to the success of our client, right? So the first step of that was IO Builders with a tokenization platform, and tokenization of not just a few instruments, but they tokenize pretty much everything you want to tokenize, right? And we can go through the list, but equity, bonds, debt, financial instruments, private credit, and so on. So they have the ability to do that across jurisdictions, by the way, as well. So instead of us saying we're going to build that ourselves, the investment into a builder was an obvious choice for us. Right. And so now we're going to move to the other pieces of what we believe the solutions are really needed on the top of Hedera. And we're going to invest into those companies or those cases as an organization. So I won't give you the specifics, but this is a really important part of the strategy is to acquire capabilities and functions and teams on the top of the network, and IO Builders was the first one. Thank you. Yeah, you're sharing some of the slides from IO Builder, from Assetto. This is very interesting team, very strong platform with real revenue. Right, we talked about that earlier. This is a real business, right? And for us, it's really interesting. Carlos, the CEO, is an amazing leader, and we are very fortunate to be part of that journey.
Love that. And I think maybe it's a coming of age. I'm trying not to sound old when I say this, right? But maybe it's a coming of age moment, because I think in the early days of treasuries and grants and more of the decentralized ethos kind of energy, having a bottom up, having a grassroots builder community that was aligned in incentive to see the value of the ecosystem, the value of their tokens and their equity in the ecosystem go up, was theoretically enough. But I think what we saw was a mishmash of, and I can say some of this from personal experience, investment teams that weren't mature enough to know when to give and when not to give. Mm-hmm. Builder teams that understood Web3 but didn't understand the world. So could build things that worked with blockchain technology but that would never scale or that would never generate revenue. And then also just a bunch of free money giving because somebody said, well, we've got to make sure, one of our objectives, one of our OKRs is how many grants we give out, and with no accountability at the back end of it, which again, I remember the halcyon days of hearing teams who'd received 3 grants from 3 different blockchain ecosystems with zero requirement to deliver anything and or stay committed to building in that ecosystem. Yeah. And I sort of thought, how have we found ourselves here? And I think there's probably room for a middle ground, which is I don't think we want to completely cut off the grassroots development and innovation in the ecosystem. And it sounds like your studios are a way of helping to access that in an early stage way. But we also need to make revenue. And at this stage in the game, we can't be waiting or not investing in projects that will turn that for us.
Yeah, and I really I want to reinforced what you're saying. The fact that the grassroots activity is critical for any project is true. It was true before blockchain, by the way, right? When you think of Linux, for example, the community around Linux was critical to the success of Linux, even before Red Hat mostly, were starting to generate revenue. So we need to continue to do that. And by the way, we were the first layer one to contribute our code to the Linux Foundation for Decentralized Trust under Project Hiro, right? So, and we did that, I think it was maybe 2 years ago now. And that is because our commitment to the community is very, very strong. We want to make sure we engage with the community of developers and builders to continue to improve the code. And everything we build is contributed to Hiro. And so this is, to me, to your point, you cannot make a choice between one or the other, right? You live in a world where every constituent is important, but you need to be able to allocate resources based on what you want to achieve, right? If you want to achieve adoption by a large set of developers, then you have to spend money and energy on Hiro, on Linux Foundation. But if you want to generate revenue, you have to also invest into building solutions that people are going to buy. We are doing both, and I think you're right. Everybody needs to do both, because if you do just one, then you won't be able to succeed.
I think that's a really nice way of summarizing it. And I think you see some ecosystems that have realized this. I think everyone's realized it too late, but I think those that are going to succeed, or those that have a greater chance of succeeding, are very clearly pursuing an M&A strategy now, or have done for the past 12, 24 months, mm-hmm. in anticipation of needing to have a lower demand on the treasury. Others have said, no, we'll just keep building, the product, will build it and they'll continue to come. Meanwhile, we've seen AI capture the attention of developers. We've seen AI capture the attention of VCs, and it's a more competitive landscape out there. It's not as simple.
Yeah.
So we can't expect the same handouts or the same easy ride that we've had for the last maybe 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I haven't done the research on this, but I'm pretty sure that every large success story startup, every one of them at some point made a pivot that is pretty significant before they became successful, right? They didn't start with a vision and a strategy and never changed, right? Almost everybody at some point has to change. Right. So if you're stuck into the free money world, we're going to build stuff and hope for the best, and you don't change that strategy ever, that to me, that's a mistake, because pivoting is actually one of the success factors for any startup.
And it's easier to do in a startup that's controlled by a small number of individuals with high agency. It is incredibly difficult to do in the decentralized world. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's not wanting to give people an easy ride, but also wanting to be fair to a lot of Web3, is that it's not every ecosystem is fully autonomous, or that one of the overlords can come down and say, suddenly we're doing this, and that's what everybody does. Or if that is the case, then you don't have a very decentralized ecosystem.
And I think one of the topic we haven't touched on yet is the AI. The killer app for AI is blockchain. The killer app for blockchain is AI, kind of deal, right? This is a very important discussion, because I think we are in a world where we are giving AI such a big set of power, set of influence to our lives, to our organizations, to our governments. But we need accountability. And to me, one of the ways to enable that accountability, that audit trail, that trust into the AI model, engine, agent, whatever you want to call that, is by using decentralized technologies, right? And that's something we've been investing into quite a while with the AI Studio. I invite everybody to go check the AI Studio, because you can start engaging in that discussion with a lot of code already available, open source, and you can integrate your AI activities, your AI code with Hedera, and make sure that you have an audit trail, make sure you have some kind of accountability to the AI, to your AI solutions. So really, really interesting point, very important point for all of us to think about this. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Fully agree with you on that one. I mean,
a lot of content. Yeah.
The beauty of live streams and LinkedIn Live, you can scroll through websites and show people stuff in real time. But yeah, if you want to go to hedera.com/product/AI studio, lots of examples of what's in there. I think it's pretty obvious to most that protocol-based autonomous trust in and around AI is going to be valuable. I think the overthink on this one is that there's ever going to be a winner, or that there's only ever one way to generate trust. I think agents will consume decentralized or blockchain-based trust very easily because agents love protocols. They will operate on ones and zeros. The interesting analogy I draw today is that a lot of LLMs decisioning or the content that they choose to surface is based on Reddit consensus. How many Reddit articles are written by people about certain topics, and how many upvotes those topics get. So it's based on an amalgamation of human experience as opposed to verified truth. In transaction terms, it has to be ones and zeros, unquestionably. What I think we might end up with is a little bit of a patchwork. And I think of it a little bit like trust miles, is that you're going to see agents that operate in multiple ecosystems, and some of them will spend some time in Hedera, and they'll build some experience in Hedera that will give you some Hedera points, some Hedera transactions that people can see over there. These guys have been very, very good. Then they'll be over in OpenAI world, or they'll be over in Grok and X world, or they'll be over in VeChain world. They'll do some things over there, and they'll accumulate some trust from those particular activities. The more of those data points you put together, potentially the more trustworthy or the more trust score you see.
Yeah,
it's not going to be from a single source.
I think what you're saying is really important. So what it means is, and typically in innovation, that's true. When you start innovation, you have a lot of fragmentation because you have a lot of people with a lot of ideas doing a lot of different things. And we have to accept that because this is good. Fragmentation is good because it creates the best solution at the end. And because we are in that phase, we have to be able to say those platforms, the interoperability of the platforms, whether it's blockchain platforms, AI platforms, and so on, that is going to be a critical part of our success. And I'm going to go back to Clipper we talked about earlier, the cross-ledger protocol we launched last month. This is a really important piece of that future where you can connect different systems without making a bet on a single technology and be locked into a technology, because now you can access the fragmentation, which means the innovation of the ecosystem you live in. That is really interesting.
Super important point. And we'll probably end on that one, which is AI, I think, as you said, is extending fragmentation of pockets of efficiency, pockets of economy, pockets of activity. Now, the nice thing is those different pools of activity, of yield, of data, of commerce can be accessed fully autonomously 24/7 in an agentic way and in a headless way, right? A marketplace or a place to do business doesn't need to have a website anymore. What we're saying is an agent will connect with an ecosystem, goes into the Hedera ecosystem, finds a particular stable coin path or particular yield path or particular economic activity where it can either deploy capital, deploy expertise, deploy compute, return with some yield to its owner, and then go off and do other things. While it's over here in Hedera land, it's gathering trust points, it's gathering reputation. And then when it sees a better opportunity, it'll go somewhere else. And so the nice thing there is that's all based on objective fact. If it's based on protocols and very clear rules, you're not saying, oh, okay, I'm going to buy this car because the branding and the marketing is better. You're going to say, I'm going to buy this particular car because it has the performance characteristics of what I need. As an agent, the performance characteristics are probably one of two things. It's either speed or money. And time is money. So ultimately, one is two anyway. I don't want to philosophize too much about where we go next, but honestly speaking, if you expect fragmentation, expect switching, but at the same time, expect a lot of the front end for a lot of these experiences are probably still going to be owned by the one or two big AI giants because they're going to have the marketing budget, they're going to have the interface, they're going to have the partnerships. That's where people start. But that doesn't mean you can't start in Claude and end up in Hedera.
Right, and the switching costs, is increasing as fragmentation and innovation scales down, right? Which is typical, right? There's nothing new here, but I think we have a chance with those technologies that we all have now to limit that switching cost, and so make sure that we have an option, even if we've been using one solution for 10 years. We still have the option to move to another one because there is a new one coming that's better. And today, I think those technologies are going to help us do that.
Fully agree. Yeah. I'll leave it with this point. For those people who want to find out more about what you're doing, obviously hashgraph.com to find out more what the Hashgraph teams are building, hedera.com to find more about the Hedera ecosystem more broadly. Eric, do you want to leave the audience with anything? Who do you want to get in touch with you next? Who are the people out there watching this who you'd love to speak to, who you'd love to bring to the Hashgraph community?
So I'm actually interested into two different topics today. I'm interested into how do we make stablecoin a reality for enterprises, because there is a promise of delivering cheap, fast, 24/7
and
risk
yield bearing.
Yeah, yield bearing. Yeah, all of those things to the organizations. But I think we are missing a few pieces to get there, right? I think it's happening, but it's not happening at scale yet. So I have some ideas, and I'd love to engage on that discussion. And that's number one. And then number two is how do you accelerate the adoption of AI and blockchain together, like we talked about earlier? How do you make sure that we don't end up in a world where we've lost control of AI because we are using blockchain technologies? Those are the two things that I would love to continue the discussion on.
All right. Thank you for that, Eric. So if you're out there looking into stable coins or blockchain AI, there's a person here on the Hashgraph side who would love to hear more. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time. As always, the conversations we have together are super enjoyable, super insightful, and genuinely wish you and the team every success. Mance, Lehman, everybody kind of associated with the team, genuinely, because I believe you're trying harder at making protocols profitable part than many others. It sounds like an interesting roadmap. And again, if you get to see a Grand Prix every once in a while as well, that's not a bad thing. Thank you so much for joining the show. Have a great weekend and have fun out there.
Thank you. Thank you. You as well. Hope to see you in person very soon in Paris or elsewhere. Thank you.